So on that note, we have with us Arif Jethra. So Jethra, PhD, is a scientist with the Institute for Work and Health and an assistant professor at the University of Toronto Sally Lana School of Public Health. His research spans population health systems, science, and social policy to examine how the future of work will impact the labor market engagement of vulnerable workers. So please join us to welcome Arif.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen and put the slides up.
I got so nervous before you start, Arif. I will just let people know that due to bandwidth issues, we will likely, remove some video as we go forward. But please do. You're fine as you're speaking, but just for others. And please do write in the chat window questions that you have, should you like. Arif has planned a sort of an interactive piece to his presentation, but for the other speakers, they will take questions and answers through the chat window. So you feel free, and we will try to our very best to get to those. So thanks.
Yeah, actually, Kimberly, I'm just going to ask if you or a member of your team can read out any of the comments that pop up. That'd be helpful because I don't see the comment box.
Will do. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be talking to you all today about a topic that's really fun to talk about and one that I've been researching for the last several years, and that is the future of work. And so in this presentation, I'm going to be addressing the following key questions. The first is, what is the future of work? It's a term that gets thrown out a lot in the media, and you've probably encountered it. And so I'm going to try to tackle what it means and what does it mean for OHS professionals. I'm also going to start thinking about how can we start planning for the future of work in our professional practice. So I'll introduce some tools and some approaches that can get you thinking into a future-focused perspective. So those are kind of like the key elements of this talk today. Just before I start, I want to give a very brief intro to the organization in which I'm based, the Institute for Work and Health. We're a not-for-profit academic research organization in Toronto. And we conduct and share research to protect and improve the health of working people. And our research is carried out in two broad domains. The first is the prevention of injury, and the second is to improve health and recovery of injured workers. All right, let's start by defining this concept of the future of work. And so to do so, I draw from multiple perspectives. And I define the future of work as the large scale and rapid digitization and automation of diverse domains of working life. What's important to highlight is that the future of work is not just about technology. It also includes social, demographic, political, and environmental changes. And I'll discuss some of this as the presentation moves on. And the biggest thing that's important to highlight, and what many scholars suggest, is that the future of work will reflect a dramatic change to every industry and transform all aspects of our working life, including the conditions we face at work, the ways we work, how we work, where we work. And the future of work and this concept of the future of work is superimposed on top of ongoing changes that we're seeing right before our eyes. For instance, the industrial shift from manufacturing to more service-based sectors, the offshoring of work, the growth in non-standard work arrangements. The future of work will kind of compound and add to some of these ongoing changes that we're already seeing. So why is it important to study the future of work? And I think one key aspect of this discourse is the fact that the future of work is going to spur or create new occupations as a result of many of the trends that I'm going to outline in this presentation. So in a study that I'm going to just talk about right now, economists at MIT conducted an analysis of occupational titles that existed in the 1940s and compared them to occupational titles that existed in 2018. And what the scholars found was that 60% of occupations held by employees in 2018 did not exist in the 1940s. And so these are brand new occupations with evolving workforce conditions, and in our world, evolving occupational hazards that we need to account for. And so obviously the authors highlight the emergence of technology-related occupations like information technology specialists or engineers in solar and wind power. But the scholars also talk about in-person jobs like mental health counselors, sommeliers, or fitness coaches, representing another category of occupations that emerged during that period of time. So indeed, technology has played a significant part of these new technologies, but the authors also point to increased globalization, which has resulted in a decline in agricultural and manufacturing jobs. Also, the authors talk about a rise in wages, which has meant that people have more money to spend in the service-based economy and giving rise to some of those service-based jobs. So these are really powerful findings. And based on these findings, we can start to ask ourselves several questions. The first is, what new jobs will be created in the next 2 decades? How will the working conditions within these new jobs create physical or psychosocial hazards, which have implications for health and safety? And what steps can we take in the present to address OHS challenges that may emerge in the future? And so through this presentation, we'll start to explore the answers to some of these key questions. I'm also going to introduce you to a tool that you may access that could help you take a future-focused perspective. Another reason for studying the future of work is that it can create inequities within the working population that have implications for health. Past periods of technological change or periods of recession have resulted in displacement of jobs, contributed to income polarization, as well as have eroded standard and secure work opportunities. Based on research conducted during these past periods, findings show that the most vulnerable groups of workers tend to be adversely affected. For example, young workers were particularly affected by the 2008 Great Depression and more likely to report sustained job loss when compared to other age groups. Studies during the Great Recession also show a decline in mental health among young workers directly tied to change in their socioeconomic position. More recently, the automation of work has had an adverse impact on vulnerable workers, especially those in repetitive and low-skilled jobs. Although less studied, the automation of work has also significant health implications. And so compared to these past examples, changes in the future of work are occurring at a faster pace and are disrupting a greater number of industries and occupations, highlighting the potential for more significant health and social inequities. Drawing from lessons from the past, it's my position that we need to take a more strategic approach to anticipating future changes to the working world and to understand the impact on the health of the working population. Okay, I'm going to stop for a second and I'm going to ask a question to the group. I'm used to doing more in-person types of presentations, and obviously we haven't been able to do that over the last 2 years. So I'm going to try to do something that in a virtual setting, and so I'm going to ask the team to support this. And so I'm going to ask you all to think about something. So if you were to meet Marty McFly, which was the character from Back to the Future, I hope most of us have seen that movie, what would be one question you would want to ask him about how conditions within your workplace or the broader labor market might change 15 years from now? I'm curious to hear some thoughts on what questions you might ask this person who might go into the future and ask them about how things might change.
I'm perusing for you. Are we still working a 5-day work week?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. So changes to the structure of our work. Any others?
Or do we have autonomous drivers? Automated driving.
Okay.
Do you see an overall positive influence in a positive workplace?
Oh, interesting.
Is everything automated?
Mm,
Is everything operated from home?
interesting.
Do employers buy and work with chemical products based on their hazards versus their marketed benefits?
Oh, these are really great
Excellent
perspectives.
questions.
Yeah. And so obviously we don't know the answers to these questions, but we can start thinking about what could happen in the future. And that's kind of where this presentation will kind of move towards. So at the Institute for Work and Health, we recently completed a comprehensive horizon scan of gray and peer-reviewed research, as well as social media, to examine aspects of the future of work that could emerge and contribute to adverse conditions for workers. And so overall, our team identified 9 key macro trends from technological, social, political, and environmental domains. Examples of trends included the digital transformation of the economy, growing application of artificial intelligence to automate work, climate change, and the green economy, to name a few. Of note, our study highlighted that these trends were interrelated and could individually as well as collectively contribute to vulnerability in the future of work. The Horizon Scan provides a roadmap to understand how the future of work could create conditions that pose challenges for different groups of workers. The scan can also identify where strategies can be implemented within workplaces and policy settings so that they are resilient to changes in the future of work. And so given the time constraints of this talk, I'm going to briefly touch on just a few themes that emerged in this research in greater depth. So in discussions on the future of work, it's clear to see that technology will shape employment conditions. And so a lot of attention is being directed towards the digital transformation of the economy as a significant driver of change. And so we often hear about the Internet of Things, smart sensors, cloud computing, virtual and augmented reality, 3D printing, blockchain technology. Additionally, there's been an increasing discourse on artificial intelligence and machine learning, with workplaces deploying computerized systems to replicate human intelligence and behaviors. And so while these are all diverse technologies, I think one key aspect is that they're resulting in hyperconnectivity between people, businesses, digital devices, and data. They're also rapidly changing the way jobs are performed and the requirements for humans to work alongside machines, which definitely have implications for OHS. The findings from our research show that the impact of technology can be fragmented depending on where you work and who you are. First, technology can have an adverse impact on employment as well as health and safety outcomes. For example, the advancement of digital platforms has facilitated gig work, which could be more precarious and stressful. Also, the growing application of artificial intelligence could lead to the automation of work, where repetitive job tasks will continue to be replaced by machines. An example could be self-checkout counters replacing cashiers at a higher rate. Over time, though, as certain technology advances, it's expected that more complex and predictive job tasks could be automated. As a result, could be greater competition for both entry-level jobs as well as professional jobs. Also, there's a risk that only available entry-level jobs will be those that pay less, have unpredictable physical demands, and could be more unsafe. It's thought that these types of jobs tend to be less likely to be automated. An example could be a nursing aide in a long-term care setting. That's a job that's going to be pretty challenging for a robot to do. At the same time, technology could also be associated with opportunities and benefits for OHS. Obviously, the advancement of different technologies will contribute to productivity gains and the development of new occupations. Different technologies could also be leveraged to create conditions that are more accessible and safe. So for instance, smart robots in manufacturing settings could enable a person to take on more cognitive demands while relying on a robot for more physical support. Digital technology can also provide a level of flexibility that could be beneficial for people with different health impairments. Also, while the gig work can be seen in a negative light for some workers, it could also provide an entry point into the labor market. Furthermore, in a digitized world, workers with emotional intelligence, which cannot be replaced by computers at this point, could be in high demand by employers. And this could create opportunities for diverse groups of workers who have lived experience and tend to be excluded from the labor market. And so it's important to highlight that the future of work is not just about technology, and I've emphasized that a few times. In our research, we found that climate change, globalization, populist sentiments are also expected to change the nature and availability of work. Similarly, external shocks like a recession, natural disaster, or as we've seen in the last 2 years, a pandemic, has the potential to disrupt employment and drastically change working conditions. Consistent with these trends, we've found that it's often the most vulnerable groups who will be the first to be affected and more likely to face adverse working conditions resulting from these trends. So again, highlighting potential opportunities as practitioners that we can address as we think about the future of work. And so if you want to learn more about this specific study and each of the trends we identified, you can read a recent paper that we published in the American Journal of Industrial Medicine. And we also have a short report that is more accessible on the Institute for Work and Health's website. So I definitely encourage you to check out both. Another reason why we should be studying the future of work is to understand and engage in debate on whether changes to the working world will indeed have a significant impact on workers. And in my opinion, it's important to understand these various opinions in the development of strategic plans related to the future of work. And so our team recently led interviews with policy leaders and future of work experts from across the country to examine their thoughts and perspectives regarding the future of work and how it could impact vulnerable workers. Increasingly, we heard diverging opinions, with some policy leaders acknowledging that the future of work was going to result in a considerable impact on workers and workplaces. Whereas other policy leaders felt like the discourse of the future of work is overblown and maybe we're paying too much attention to it. Let me provide you with some examples. So one participant we talked to, discussed the evolution of artificial intelligence and how it could make a considerable impact on the working world as the technology advances and becomes more intelligent. This participant noted, AI is like electricity. every service network will be using some element of AI. At the beginning, a lot of it will not be very smart. It will be relatively simple, but it will be there. And over time, it will grow in intelligence. So there's a new layer of infrastructure over and above roads and bridges. It's a digital infrastructure that moves from connectivity through all the wonderful things. The intelligent layer is going to redefine and restructure industries in ways that we can't fully appreciate yet because we're just on the cusp of those changes. There's a fundamental change to the underlying infrastructure to the economy. So indeed, technological advances hold possibilities for workers that we need to fully understand as well as amplify. On the other hand, another participant expressed their opinion that many overinflate the impact of the future of work. This person said, I do want to just make a general observation about what I see as honestly alarmism around automation. The history of labor in the Western world is that since the 18th century, in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, workers have been adjusting to automation. So automation is not a new thing, and adjusting to technological changes also is not a new thing. I think that's just an ongoing thing. So we're continuing to adjust in that kind of historical circumstance. So as noted by this participant, it's important to acknowledge that workers have always adapted to changes in the working world. But it's my position that as knowledge leaders, we need to be at the forefront of understanding whether things are changing and how. We also need to be willing to adapt processes to support workers who are being exposed to a changing working world as a way to ensure that they're able to overcome potential challenges that could emerge. As a scientist, I believe that there is a need to build an evidence base that can be used by decision makers at the policy and organizational level to understand potential scenarios that characterize the future of work and determine how they could be associated with changes to workplaces and working conditions. And this information to me is critical for strategic planning. So at the Institute for Work and Health, we're currently integrating traditional research approaches with tools from the field of strategic foresight. So what is strategic foresight? It's a systematic and participatory methodological process to create coherent medium to long-term views of the future of work. And so the goal is to identify alternative future scenarios that could emerge. And it's informed by signals of change, like some of the findings from the Horizon scan that I presented earlier. And it draws on diverse expertise, ideas, and insights from different stakeholders. And the ultimate goal of a foresight study is to generate evidence that fosters preparedness and resilience. So as noted, the overarching goal of a foresight study is to identify alternative future scenarios. The primary aim is not to propose one correct future scenario, but to develop multiple alternative future storylines. And these future scenarios can be a future that has the potential to unfold, one that we would prefer to unfold, ones that we expect to occur based on an extrapolation of past events, or maybe one that we just don't know will exist. And so of note, our ability to identify and contextualize these alternative futures is often based on our current or historical framing of a problem. Also, our ability to develop alternative future scenarios are often constrained by the limits of our knowledge on the topic. Nonetheless, the generation of these different alternative future scenarios can be used to identify and form policies and programs that ensure long-term preparedness and resilience. And I'll provide some more specific concrete examples if this is not totally making sense at this stage. And so the field of foresight has stemmed from military planning, but over the last few decades, it's been utilized quite widely by policymakers and organizations to plan for the future. In fact, the Government of Canada has a whole department dedicated to strategic foresight to inform labor market and social policy recommendations. So it's a tool that's being used quite rapidly and quite readily. So let me provide you with an example of how foresight can be used in the field of occupational health and safety. In 2018, the European Agency for Safety and Health at Work conducted a foresight study to examine how digitization and technological advancement can impact occupational health and safety across the EU. Through a strategic foresight engagement approach, they developed 4 alternative scenarios reflecting various levels of the following factors. The first factor was the technological impact on jobs. The second was the economic growth related to technological adoption. The third factor was technological governments, and the fourth was societal attitudes towards technology. And so each scenario reflects a varying level of one of those 4 factors. Utilizing each alternative scenario, the authors then examined potential occupational health and safety risks and proposed specific strategies to mitigate those emerging challenges. So as noted, 4 alternative scenarios were developed. Each of these scenarios were different storylines, which reflect different ways in which technology impacts jobs, the economy, governance, and societal attitudes towards technology. And I don't expect you to read each of these boxes, so I'm going to focus on one of the specific scenarios, which is scenario 3. In this scenario, the authors describe a scenario or a world where half of jobs have been automated in a desire to maximize corporate profits. In this scenario, mainly routine and repetitive jobs have been automated to save costs. The result is high unemployment and competition for limited numbers of jobs. And based on this scenario and through a foresight approach, the team identified several implications for occupational health and safety that they thought should be important to consider within this scenario 3. The first is, within scenario 3, the workforce is more willing to accept an OHS risk to obtain employment because there are so few job opportunities available. Increasing robotics and automation remove people from hazardous physical, chemical, and biological work environments, which can be optimal from an occupational health and safety perspective. There's a pressure to perform at the same level as robots, which can cause stress and MSD issues as a result of poor ergonomics or working too fast. Also within the scenario, technology is increasingly complex and brought to market quickly, which can lead potentially to hazardous design flaws that are difficult to spot. So based on these implications, we could work with OHS professionals to design strategies to proactively address the challenges that have the potential to emerge. It's important to highlight, though, that the European agency's Foresight study was published in 2018. The scenarios that they designed will certainly have been affected by advancements in machine learning, which have led to the automation of more predictive and complex job tasks. Also, the scenarios could also be affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, which dramatically altered working conditions and contributed to increased employer investment into artificial intelligence to maintain productivity. Nonetheless, I think that the European agency's case study does a fantastic job of highlighting how strategic foresight can be used in the field of occupational health and safety to get us thinking in a future-focused perspective. So it's important to highlight that the use of foresight methods is increasing in our field. So for instance, NIOSH has a dedicated team applying foresight approaches to advance knowledge and practice on worker safety, health, and well-being. They also have Foresight Friday seminar series, which highlights how they're utilizing foresight in the field. So I definitely encourage you to sign up for those seminar series, which are free and online. They also published a really nice overview of foresight methods that I would encourage individuals on this call to read if you want to learn more about some of the strategies that I have just talked about. All right, let's go back to our little thought activity and let's turn back to our friend Marty McFly. So after learning about the future from Marty McFly, would you integrate the information into your practices as an OHS professional? If so, how would you take those insights and integrate it into what you do on a daily basis?
Hey, I'm welcoming the chat window for you. I think people are absorbing your question. So I think Marty's answered our questions, and now we want to know how we're going to integrate this into our OHS practice.
Well, I guess the first question is, would you? Like, do you feel that looking into the future through a systematic way, would you value that information in your practice? And if so, how would you then integrate it?
Yes, we're getting good. We're getting some yeses. And then how, Daryl? Not sure how. Awesome.
Fair enough. Well, I guess that's something for us to think about as we move forward with this thought process. So maybe I can just kind of conclude and we can have opportunities. Oh, there's
Yeah, absolutely. Not people aren't sure, but they know
sure.
that it would make sense with the business. And I think it's to your point about, strategic planning, or, one of the reasons we had you chat today was about setting us up properly for illness prevention, for example,
Yeah.
and repeating the same old when we know we have underreporting and underrecognition, we know we overexpose people, and we know, and it's sort of like adding that lens of equity, of foresight, of strategic foresight planning, of really opening the floodgates, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess that's the point, right? The goal is to start thinking differently as a way to spur new ideas, to think about things in a new light, and maybe through that you start building ideas that maybe unconventional, but maybe addressing issues that have the potential to emerge in the future. So I'm going
Absolutely.
to finish off. I have the last few slides, and then I can open up the Q&A. So I just want to highlight some challenges with this approach and thinking from a future-facing perspective. And I think those in the chat group who were unclear of how they would integrate this type of insight into their work, I think that's a really great point. And I think that's one that we've really identified in our work. So like any methodology, there's challenges to applying a strategic foresight approach. And based on our experiences in the field, we found that thinking about the future can be challenging for decision makers who are often focused on dealing with challenges in the present. And it's important to tap into methods like foresight to encourage us to shift our focus to one that's forward thinking. So I think that's a really important activity, and it's a thought activity that I think we should all engage with in our own practices, even just organizationally, to think about how we can adapt our organizational practices. And as we've learned in the past 2 years, the working world can change in an instant. Accordingly, foresight studies should be seen as a living and breathing project. And so signals of change, scenarios, and policies should be monitored, updated, modified frequently to adapt our perceptions of the future that we may be developing. Ultimately, though, a strategic foresight study, insights are based on current evidence and our current understanding of how things could change. And that really limits the validity of the approach, because we can never actually know if a scenario is going to occur until the future actually unfolds. But that being said, a foresight approach remains a powerful method to encourage a future-facing perspective and to build policies and programs that have the potential to be resilient to changes that could occur. So there's definitely some challenges, but there's a lot to be learned from thinking or trying to change your frame of reference. So I'm going to leave you with some final thoughts. The field of OHS, as we know, is directly tied to the social, technological, economic, environmental, and political changes that characterize the future of work. But studies of occupational health and safety relevant to the future of work are still in their infancy. Based on our research and the research led by many others, the future of work will create new occupations, new working conditions that will be associated with novel physical and psychosocial conditions and hazards that we need to be aware of. From an OHS perspective, the future of work will affect workers differently according to their occupation and industry, and we need to be a little bit more cognizant of that. For some, changes in the future of work could result in the use of technologies or a change in working conditions that minimize exposure to workplace hazards. For others, the future of work could exacerbate health and safety risks or create new hazards. Also, as we highlight in our research, some workers enter the future of work at a position of disadvantage and might be more likely to face displacement or forced into more precarious and unsafe conditions. Understanding worker vulnerability will be an important next step in designing and implementing OHS interventions that account for changes in the future. As noted in the earlier slide, we acknowledge that for many, it can be challenging to think about the future. However, it is important for decision makers to take a future-focused perspective to their OHS practice. Foresight methods provide that specific approach that can help us anticipate changes in the future and develop practices. And just lastly, the future of work will continue to change. And as a result, we need to be able to constantly calibrate our understanding of the working world. Unexpected external shocks like the COVID-19 pandemic may contribute to an acceleration of change and may impact workplace health and safety risks in unexpected ways. It's important to continue to study the changing labor market to continue to build and refine applied strategies that are resilient to the future. And so I'm going to leave you there with some thoughts, but I just want to acknowledge our funder, which is a New Frontiers in Research Fund, which is a collaborative engagement initiative from Canada's 3 main funding bodies, research funding bodies. I'd also like to give a shout out to my multidisciplinary research team, which includes subject matter experts in diverse fields from across Canada, as well as internationally. And very lastly, if you have questions about this presentation or about our research on the future of work at the Institute for Work and Health, I encourage you to send me a note, follow me on Twitter, or sign up for our IWH e-alerts and our newsletter. So I'll leave you there, and I'm looking forward to any questions that might emerge if we do have time for them.
Sure. Yeah, we definitely do, Aretha. I just want to thank you so much for such a really thought-provoking chat, and this whole idea of strategic foresight and from where it comes. And I think a lot of this group, it's not, we've experienced things like we saw and are seeing, COVID being so highly impactful, as with all occupational illness, on vulnerable populations. And I think I'm just interested if in the strategic foresight process, if history comes into play, because we all know that this shouldn't be a shock to us, right? We had SARS-1, we had done planning, pandemic planning, we had lots of things in place that would have helped better address this. And I guess I just wonder if history is involved, or cycles involved, in your strategic foresight planning. So you want to be so forecasting all these insane scenarios around artificial intelligence, but we can't even seem to necessarily, you know, a strategic plan for the things we know.
Yeah.
So just, yeah, I'm curious if that history is brought into your process.
Yeah, definitely. I think obviously our knowledge of a topic provides a foundation for our thoughts on the future, and it's informed by our previous experiences on a topic. So indeed, like if you were conducting a pandemic foresight study, past experiences of pandemic would certainly inform your thoughts about potential alternative futures. That being said, what you'd want to do is start thinking about how to access diverse sources of evidence, not just peer-reviewed evidence, but talking to knowledge leaders, talking to different types of futurists or experts in different areas to think about how could things evolve over time. So for instance, a big aspect of the pandemic is the fact that our world is so interconnected and people fly so across borders so quickly, right? And what does that mean to pandemic spread? And obviously we could probably track that back to SARS, but things have evolved so rapidly over time, and the scale of change and the way that people interact has also evolved over time. And so to be able to talk to experts who have insights into these different areas and into like inform your strategic planning approach, I think is critical to start thinking beyond what we have known in the past and thinking about how things could change in the future. And so again, this is a thought exercise, right? Like these are exercises to get us just thinking differently, but they've been utilized in like military planning to like project potential for like a threat that could happen. And I think a lot of people have accessed these types of methods as a way to inform the decisions that they're making, as a way to potentially account for changes that could occur.
Excellent. I do see lots of comments. I'll let people read the comments on their own and just make sure that I capture any questions, but you feel
Mm-hmm.
free to raise a hand, or if you'd like to unmute, if you prefer, rather than writing. And I welcome, we still have a few minutes, but I'm not seeing any immediate questions. I did, while I'm waiting, I kind of explore how workers utilize this. You know, what do workers ask for when this idea of yours is coming around in their workplace? And I think it would be a cool, like, how could you frame that from a worker perspective?
Yeah, so in an ideal scenario, you'd have workers involved in this foresight approach where their insights and their perceptions of how things are currently and how things might change should be part of the picture, right? To do a fulsome foresight study. But what we've found when we've talked to workers in our research on this topic is that there's like a significant challenge to thinking in the future. And so I think like one of the big discourses in this methodological field is to utilize storylines, to utilize creative ways of asking questions as a way to encourage people to think from a future focused perspective. That being said, we continue to find it challenging to have people really think 10, 15 years from now and think beyond the current environment. And I think that's not, it's not surprising given that many people are just so focused on managing the current situation and overcoming the current pandemic that thinking 15 years from now is so challenging, especially in the last year where things have changed on a monthly basis so drastically.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So you did that with us today, and I just wanted to draw that to people's attention, that if you think it's not part of your, you know, repertoire, that you absolutely were part of it with your questions to Marty McFly. So, you know, and our thought process. So you engaged us all in how to have strategic foresight. So I really appreciate it. So I think that's it. Arif, I really appreciate your sharing, and we will we will invite you to stay or go as your day permits. And I will introduce our next speaker, if that's okay.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.